shut, he slowly walked back to his bed and sat down. That's when he appeared. Paul had seen him at his window before, but not like this. His face was not as distorted as usual. He could make out his beady black eyes and a look of sick happiness on his twisted face. The window slowly creaked open and Solomon's tall figure began to jerk in through the opening. Crawling and wheezing heavily, he kept his eyes locked onto Paul, but Paul could not look away. Creeping over to where Paul was sat, he pointed his finger towards his wrist and marked a cross on his skin using a fingernail. In doing so, he stared at Paul and smiled. After that, Paul told me that he had passed out. The mixture of pain and fear had become too much for him. He woke up the next day with his window latch still broken. It was not a dream, and he had the scar to prove it. A few days had gone by and we were all terrified by his story, but we had no idea what to do. We couldn't hide, we couldn't tell anyone because they'd always react the same way that Tom's parents did, and definitely couldn't stop them ourselves. We were tortured nightly by someone or something, and it was made much worse not knowing what we were dealing with. After a surprisingly good night's sleep, I awoke to a knock at the door. It was Michael. After getting dressed, he took me on to the brook alongside the back of my house. "There's something you need to see. It's only about a mile away from here," he said nervously. After we finally reached our destination, I was confronted by an old abandoned house. I immediately knew where we were, but I didn't know why. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked angrily. "I thought you should see it. I thought maybe you'd like to know that it's still here." "Well, I didn't know it was still here, that's for sure. But I really don't want to be anywhere near this house." "You need more answers, and if there's even a slight possibility that you'll find some here, we should probably go inside." I hated to admit it, but he was right. I had nothing. Some history on Solomon and the color of his eyes wasn't going to get me anywhere. I had to go inside. For all of us. "Okay, fine, let's go then," I said with infinite sickness in my stomach. Upon going inside, we could see that it was completely abandoned and destroyed. The stairs leading up to the second floor had collapsed into a pile of wooden rubble. The living room and kitchen looked as if they'd been lit alight, and there was nothing left in the house that had indicated anyone had ever lived there. The only thing that looked to be in shape was the basement door. Michael was the first of us to grab the door handle. He anxiously turned the knob and began to walk down the rotting wooden steps. I nervously followed as the light from the living room slowly lessened. As I turned the corner, I was greeted by an entire wall of photographs lit solely by a large candle on a dirty old table. Hundreds and hundreds of images scattered all over the place. Some looked as though they were from the 60s, some the 70s, the 80s. Then there were the more recent ones. After looking through them, we had found pictures of everyone we knew. There had been crosses drawn on some pictures, while others were clear of such markings. Tom's photo had a cross on it. Alex's photo had a cross on it. Paul's boasted the same scribble, and mine did as well. But Michael's was clear. There were even pictures of our parents from when they were younger. Tom's and Paul's had been crossed out, as did Michael's dad, but my parents and Michael's mom were clear. None of this made any sense. What did the crosses mean? It didn't mean death because all our parents were still alive, so what did it mean? I was racking my brains in confusion. Then we heard footsteps. We froze on the spot, too scared to move. The bangs were getting louder as they approached the basement door. That's when I realized I had left it open. It was clear that we were downstairs. The final bit of light hitting the basement turned to black, and became apparent that there was someone standing at the top of the stairs. Michael and I sneaked and hid beneath the stairs as Solomon began making his way down from above our heads. He gasped for air as he reached the bottom stair. His lanky frame hobbled over the table and took a look around at the photographs. The fear I was feeling didn't scare me at all. It compelled me to run. I nudged Michael and urged him to follow me. Right before we were about to run, Solomon turned and let out an angry croak. We ran. We were running as fast as we could, but he could still somehow keep up. All I could hear was the panting, the laughing, the hunger. He was only a foot behind us when we reached the top of the stairs. Michael slammed the door shut behind him as we reached the living room and headed straight back out to the brook. We followed the trail urgently and made our way towards our homes. I had now even more questions than ever and no answers to accompany them. When I arrived at my front door, it was already open. I walked inside the house to find my mom, dad, Alex, and Tom sat in the living room. My mom and Tom had been crying, obviously. The air felt cold. Paul had been found dead in his room. He had slit his wrist during the night. The night I had a good night's sleep. It seems that Michael is right. Now that one of us was gone, I just didn't expect it to be Paul. He drives you insane, and there is no escape when you suffer in silence. I'll never forgive myself for not giving Paul more of my time. I can't help but feel that maybe I could have saved him. I know one thing for sure. I lost a great friend that day, and I'll never forget it. 4 years have gone by since Paul ended his life. I'm now 24 years of age and living on my own apartment, far away from that old neighborhood. Alex and Tom have their own place and spend their time studying in university while I attained a simple retail job, barely managing to scrape together enough money to live off. Our lives have been scare-free for the past few years, and we were just beginning to get back to normal. There was that odd reoccurring nightmare, of course, but aside from that, the three of us were doing good. About 6 months ago, I was over at Alex and Tom's place having a few drinks and watching a couple of movies. The open talk of the intoxicated soon began, and before we knew it, we were discussing everything that happened. None of us liked to even think about the events, never mind talking about it, but I suppose that's what alcohol does to you. We found ourselves dissecting Kershaw Street, remembering the people who used to live there and all the people who left. Tom's parents were long gone, losing their minds down in Oakshale. Not long after Paul died, his parents left too. Then Michael was forced to leave with his mom and dad, as well as other neighbors just up and leaving. The street seemed so empty when we were finally gone. When me and Alex moved out, our mom and dad had decided to stay put. They said they liked the street, the area, and their jobs, and they'd never been a part of anything that had happened. It didn't take me and Alex too long to figure out that the reason we were the only kids allowed to play in the street was that our parents had never had an experience with Solomon. Most of the other parents happened to be a part of that strange history in some way. I suppose he chooses his fixations. After a few drinks and some intense talking, the three of us fell into a drunken slumber. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that we were disturbed by a banging at the door. Me and Alex opened our eyes and attempted to focus our vision. Tom was nowhere to be seen. A feeling of pure sickness hit my stomach, and it wasn't drink-related. I immediately knew what was happening. Alex wasn't as fast to react to the situation we were in. After all, it had been 4 years. We stood up and made our way towards the front door. Just as Alex turned the handle, his face changed. It was almost as if in that moment he had the realization of what could be outside. He slowly opened the door, and there was nothing but wind there, and a small white spotted bow on the ground. We slammed the door shut and made our way back into the living room. It didn't take me long to realize that I knew where we had to go. The article, the deja vu, the bow, it all added up. A shortcut through the woods to get to Oakshale. The place I refused to enter was where we would find Solomon. During my history research, I read that he would hide the dead bodies of all the children he drowned in that area because Oakshale was locally known for its beautiful scenic route. There was no way anybody would tread those woods and miss out on the wonderful sights. If Tom was going to be anywhere, it would be there. I still had the fear and didn't want to be anywhere near Oakshale at this moment, but we had to find Tom. We eventually made it to the woods and stopped on the road. Everything seemed so surreal. I took a few deep breaths and stepped onto the grass. At that moment, Alex pulled the bow out from his pocket as a brisk wind blew it from his hand and onto the ground where it had once been before. I shouted at him, grabbed him by the shirt, and questioned him why he brought it. The only answer he mustered was, "I feel like it's a big part of our whole story." As true as that may be, I didn't want to be reminded of what I saw in my mind. We slowly made our way into the woods and walked for a good 10 minutes, but nothing happened. Maybe it was just a dream, or whatever you want to call it. Then the smell hit us. Turned a corner, cut through some trees, and there it was. My nightmare. The moonlight shone brightly through the crooked branches of the trees. It bounced off the stream and seeped through every gap in sight. The tall, skinny figure of Solomon Wallace had his hands on Tom and seemed to be leading him toward the water. The figures of Paul's parents hanging in the tree spun slowly, drenched in blood and smiling like kids on Christmas. Tom's mum and dad were sat slouched against the bark opposite Tom. They were disfigured, maimed, cut apart and sewn back together to seem smaller and younger. They all looked so happy. The look on Tom's face was indescribable, a fear once thought impossible to feel. It surely matched the horror that me and Alex were feeling inside. Solomon stopped and looked at us with his black eyes. He banged and scratched on the tree next to him, but we couldn't understand. He took a few more steps towards the stream and stepped into the water with Tom as if he was going to baptize him. The torrent only reached Solomon's waist, but it completely submerged Tom. We didn't know what to do. We stood there. We just stood there, stunned and useless. Then Tom fought back. He kicked and tussled until he relinquished Solomon's grasp. Me and Alex snapped out of our trance and ran towards the water. Tom slowly crawled out of the stream as his fear was replaced by anger. Solomon let out a deafening scream and marched towards us. The three of us muscled a large rock along the ground and rolled it towards his bony structure. The stone knocked him over into the stream, landing on his chest as he failed to move it from the top of him. We couldn't stay to see the damage done. We ran home as fast as we could and called the police. We told them absolutely everything. The story of Solomon, the dead bodies in the wood, the suicides. We didn't miss anything out. The police didn't seem to care though. It was as if everyone knew in this entire town but never spoke of it. An entire town built on silence. They sent a team out to the woods and found everything that we described, all the disfigured corpses and even the body in the stream. It was finally all over. Nothing was written in the local paper the next morning, and the three of us were barely questioned on what happened. I guess everybody was still unsure on the whereabouts of Solomon Wallace and whether he really did die that night. 2 days ago, I got a phone call from the police down in my old hometown. The autopsy had been completed and the officers thought I should know the results. The body belonged to that of a man named Mr. Ted Brandley, Michael's dad. I hung up the phone, called Tom and Alex and told them to get over to my place the next day so we could talk. They arrived as I asked and I erupted, rambling in fear, screaming that he was still out there. Then I sobbed like a baby. But they interrupted me. "We just found this in the lobby downstairs." They handed me a small, ornate box. We opened it to find a broken window latch and a small drawing of my apartment. The picture was dated the 4th of April 2013 and had a small cross drawn on it. On second glance, Tom noticed it and pointed out the scribbled image of Solomon in the corner of the page. That's when we heard the scratches and taps. The three of us ran into the bathroom and locked the door. That was almost 24 hours ago, and the noise has never ceased since. It seems as though nobody escapes, not even us. So here we are, terrified in our final moments. Razors at the ready. Goodbye.